for that, Mike. So I did a debate a few weeks ago about whether Labour should be arguing for an extension to the transition period, and I found myself in the unpopular position of saying that we shouldn't. And I'm going to start off today with much the same introduction as I did then, which is to point out the reality of where Labour is at the moment. Boris Johnson has an 80-seat majority. He can do as he pleases. The government has done some spectacular U-turns, but it's basically been when it feels that its key voters are disagreeing with it. And over Brexit, basically, they don't disagree with the government. It's a very leave-oriented vote that the Tory party has at the moment. So we've got to accept the reality of the situation that on December the 31st, we are going to exit that transition period, either with a no deal or with a very skinny deal, which might eliminate a fair few of the monetary tariffs, but it will not eliminate any of the non-tariff barriers, which are actually the most important thing. And I was on a webinar with the economist Jonathan Portes a few weeks ago, and he was basically saying that in terms of the economic hit that we will suffer, there's relatively little difference between a no deal outcome and a skinny deal, which is basically the only kind of deal that the government will be able to negotiate between now and December. So starting off with that somewhat depressing summary, I therefore think that Labour's policy at the moment needs to be focused on what we want to go into a general election saying in 2024. And I think the two things that we need to be saying in that general election about Europe is we need to be criticising, really strongly criticising the Tories, because whatever they will do by December the 21st, it will be damaging to the economy, it will be damaging to jobs. We need to be holding them to account for having deliberately done that to this country. But we also want to be developing our own policy on Europe, and we want to be saying to the electorate, well, okay, what would we be doing differently? So that's at the root of everything that I'm going to sort of propose that is our way forward tonight. So I'd say that we probably don't want to be putting forward a list of demands about what the government should be negotiating, because basically they're not going to listen to us. So it should be more about chipping away at that absolutely central premise of what the Brexiteers promised, which is that we can have sovereignty, we can end freedom of movement, and there will be no economic consequences to pay for that. And we all know that that's just simply a lie. The Leave voters didn't vote for economic reasons in the main, but most of them just simply assumed the economy would just pootle along fine in or out of the EU. Very, very few of them thought that the economy would be damaged as a result of Brexit. So, you know, what is going to happen on December the 31st is directly breaking that promise that those Brexiteer campaigners made to those Leave voters. But when we talk about the economy, I think we need to be really, really careful about it. There's a famous story during the Remain campaign of a public meeting in Newcastle where an economist was saying, well, you know, Brexit will have this whatever effect on GDP, and a woman in the audience said, that's your GDP, not ours. And it's sort of clear that sort of GDP, these kind of figures don't really, they're not meaningful for people. They think it's something about, you know, London and bankers and something, you know, it's not relevant to their lives. So I think, you know, and the other problem is, of course, that by the time we get to December, the effect of COVID on the economy is just going to be so huge that we are going to really struggle to disentangle the impact of Brexit from the impact of COVID. So I think it's better if we talk about jobs rather than the economy, because that's actually meaningful to people. And by December, you know, the overwhelming likelihood is we're going to see absolutely horrendous levels of unemployment, the sort of levels that we have not seen since the 1980s because of COVID. And yet we've got a government that is deliberately pursuing a policy that will make even more people unemployed. So I think we should be going to places like Stoke-on-Trent. We should be going to these red wall towns. So Stoke-on-Trent actually has got a significant ceramics manufacturing exporting industry. And they've already raised concerns about what you know, a no deal or a skinny deal Brexit will do to their industry. So we need to be going to places like this. We need to be going to Sunderland, to Nissan, and we need to be saying to the government, you know, that's great. We didn't oppose the extension, you failing to extend transition because you said you'd get a good deal. Your deal needs to mean that not one single person will be unemployed as a result of what you're doing. I think the other thing that we need to be saying is that we want to continue abiding by existing EU regulations on consumer protection, on the environment, and on workers' rights. But we need to be arguing, you know, clearly part of the reason that the government wants a no deal or a skinny deal is that it enables them to go back on a lot of those regulations. It enables them then to strike a deal with countries like America, where there are much lower food standards, where, you know, there are, you know, they don't care so much about environmental protections or workers' rights. But we need to be opposing this, I think, on their own terms. We shouldn't, you know, it's not a case of saying we should abide by EU regulations because we love the EU. We should be saying we want to abide by these regulations because they're actually good regulations. I think particularly on food safety, I think we can assemble really quite a wide coalition of people that will oppose any lowering of food standards, ranging from, you know, very wealthy Tory voting farmers right through to kind of you know, environmental anarchists, and via a whole load of kind of Waitrose shopping Tory voters in the middle who just do not want our food standards lowered. And on workers' rights, you know, most of the Labour leavers that deserted us in those red wall seats, they're actually quite left-wing when you look at their opinions. They tend to agree with statements like management will always try to get the better of employees if it gets the chance. So if we're talking to those voters, actually saying we need to keep those protections on workers' rights, I think is actually pretty appealing. So I think we stand a fairly good chance of making those arguments on their own terms to keep in line with EU regulations. And that leads into what I sincerely hope would be our policy going into a general election, into the next general election, which is that we would want to rejoin the single market. Because if we're already abiding by all the regulations, why wouldn't we also want to enjoy all the economic benefits of that? And of course, you know, there is the issue of freedom of movement, which was, you know, let's just face it, an absolutely huge issue in the referendum. But all the opinion polls are showing that attitudes towards immigration are softening, and in fact they started softening even before the referendum. So I think we're dealing with an electorate that is much less hostile to that than it was even sort of 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, I think the fact that a bunch of EU migrants arrived, people I think often dislike change. They were resistant to it, but actually the sky hasn't fallen in. Actually, what's happened is a bunch of people came to work and contribute to Britain, and I think they've you know, most people have realised and appreciated that. I think one of the other things that we really need to be doing is to avoid catastrophising. And what I mean by that is there's obviously a lot of talk about how post December the 31st, Kent's going to turn into a lorry park. There are going to be food shortages. There are going to be medicine shortages. Now that may well happen. But I think we should avoid focusing on it, because what I suspect is that the government will devote a huge amount of energy and resources to trying to avoid those scenes of those lorries parked all the way down a motorway, of food and medicine shortages, of children dying because they couldn't get insulin or whatever. They are, you know, if those images happen, they will become iconic. They will define that government, and the government knows that. So I think they will put a lot of time and energy into trying to avoid that. You know, we saw the same thing with COVID, where they knew that images of people lying in hospital corridors, of people being turned away from hospitals, would be extremely damaging. So they focused all of their efforts on the NHS for hospitals not collapsing. And of course, we know what happened. They pushed the problem elsewhere. They pushed the problem into care homes. But I still do think the fact that they avoided those iconic images was what has helped them not face the level of criticism over COVID that I think really the numbers show that they should be doing. So I think that's the lesson they will have learnt. Just avoid those bad images, sweep it under the carpet for a bit, and we'll get away with it. And you know, the problem is, if we've been going on about all of these, you know, Kent turning into a lorry park and it doesn't happen, it's going to look like a major triumph for them if they avoid it. And it, you know, it yet again labels us as doomsters and gloomsters, and we're constantly forecasting terrible things that don't happen, and it just generally undermines our credibility. If it does happen, it is going to be really bad for them anyway, so we don't need to have gone on about it in advance. What I think has been really striking, though, is the reluctance of the government to talk about Brexit. It's pretty obvious that they don't even want to mention the word, because their entire election campaign was based around getting Brexit done. They've said we've got Brexit down, and now to keep going on about it is an admission that actually they haven't got Brexit done. So they've been very reluctant to talk about it, and Labour's clearly gone along with that, because you know, it's a difficult subject for us. Our vote is split on it, we know that, and you know, we don't want to be seen to be banging on about Europe at a time of national crisis when people's attention is obviously focused elsewhere. And I do see the argument for that. But what I sincerely hope is that it's a deliberate strategy just to wait until the point where the government is going to have to talk about Brexit. And they are going to have to talk about Brexit, because they need businesses to start making preparations. They need people to, you know, start applying to sort out their health insurance, to sort out their pets travelling. So they are going to have to talk about it at some point. But I hope that that's the point at which Labour does leap in and start saying, okay, fine, this deal you're going to negotiate, we must not have a single job lost. We must keep to all the regulations. And I hope it's not just sheer, I mean, you know, I hate to say it, cowardice, that we're just running away from the subject forever, because we can't. And I don't think it's going to help us if we do. You know, the fact is, by the end of December, our economy will already be struggling, probably very, very badly. And the last thing it needs is for the government to deliberately inflict another blow on it. And if it does, it needs to be held to account for this. But we also need to make clear that we're blaming the government mishandling Brexit and not Brexit itself. I know that's a hard thing, but what we really do need to avoid saying is, I told you so, because people stop listening at that point. We need to be focusing on saying, this is the government's fault that this has happened. And we need to be saying, you know, by 2020, the government did this, that was rubbish. Labour will do it differently. We've got a different approach to Brexit, which involves a much closer relationship with the EU, because that's actually what is going to benefit this country. It's what's going to help jobs, and the regulations that we're abiding by are good regulations in themselves. And if we maintain a close relationship with Europe, I suppose, you know, the eventual hope is that enough of the public come to accept the logic that, you know, if we're part of the single market anyway, then why not be part of the EU? It's a logical step towards that. But I think we have to take these things step by step. We can't, again, be seen to be telling people what to think. We need to be showing them. And that's what we just didn't do, I'm afraid, during most of our membership of the EU or during the Remain campaign. We didn't really show people why, or give people reasons why, positive reasons why we were members of the EU. And I think, you know, that's partly, well, a huge amount of the reason why we lost. But I think if we start again from the beginning, if we start making the arguments that the regulations are good in themselves and that it helps the economy and jobs, and then build on from there, I think you know, we've got a good chance of getting, I think, ultimately to the destination that all of us would eventually like to get to. So thank you.
Brilliant. As ever, thank you so much, Christabel. That was great. We'll go straight across to Clare Moody. Clare Moody was Labour MEP in the South West for nowhere near long enough, but for some years, and did an exemplary job, as did all our former MEPs, and hopefully they'll be back. So Claire will tell us what she thinks about, well, the same set of issues, kind of where Labour is right now, where we go next over this year, and indeed over this Parliament, if you want to look that far ahead. And then once we've heard from Claire, we will then move on to Q&A. So Claire, thank you so much. Off you go.
Thank you, Mike, and very pleased to be following on from Christabel. We are basically in the same position. So what I'm going to say is just a differently sort of laid out version of what Christabel has just said, and I will try to be brief in doing that. My view is, when I watched what Keir was doing inside the Labour Party as Brexit Secretary, before the 2019 election, I could see his lawyer's pad laying out kind of the steps he was taking to get us to a pro-referendum position and to being in that kind of pro-European political position, which, needless to say, I completely agreed with and was very grateful for him doing the best job he could in the circumstances. So when I look at where we are now, my interpretation of that kind of lawyer's pad of the steps that we are going through is twofold. One, it is looking at the short game, and two, it's looking at the long game. With regards to the short game, it is absolutely do not do what your opposition wants you to do. Don't play on their territory. We did what the opponents wanted us to do. We did what Johnson wanted us to do last December. We went after, we were in an impossible position after the SNP and the Lib Dems decided to go for an election. But a number of us could see that was a really bad idea, and the only way we could actually hold the government to account for Brexit, etc., and actually make some changes with Brexit was actually in the situation we were in at the time with rebel Tories. Clearly that's no longer the case, clearly because we all did what Johnson and Cummings wanted us to do. He now has an 80-seat majority, and therefore the game has changed completely. And the reason I say this is where I have a slightly nuanced different position to Christabel is that whilst I agree they don't want to use the word Brexit, and indeed Johnson banned the word, I think, or Cummings banned the word at the end of January once we had left, what they do want to do is have that kind of identity war, have that kind of division again. And we saw it last week, and they want to position Keir in that box. We saw it last week with the SNP Opposition Day debate, where they had a whole, the tweet went out, we abstained, we didn't engage in the SNP debate, it's the wrong time, it was the wrong debate, it serves the SNP's purpose, which was about the extension, the position on that. And they, the Tories tweet out about that was about Keir letting the electorate down. He's betraying you again. And then they got all the Red Wall MPs to quote tweet or retweet the Conservative Central Office. They want not to be talking about their response to coronavirus. They want to be talking about a Labour betrayal or us versus them, or this is the conversation they want to have, because it's that division and it's that campaigning mode that Cummings and Johnson feed off. So this is why they would love us to be, and they would, oh God, they'd love Keir to be out there kind of going on Brexit and EU related issues, because they'd use that to distract from their incredible incompetence right now in relation to COVID-19. So, that's one part of the short game. The other, related to that, is, I'm afraid, my lack of faith in quite a few of the journalists at the moment, broadcast media and particularly radio and TV, in that they love that kind of fight story rather than actually going underneath the surface. They're enjoying the kind of that surface fight they would have loved to have picked up on. And again, an example of that is what happened when Annalisa Dodds said, made a comment in response to a question about wealth tax. suddenly that's all that is, people want to talk about Labour is, that one bit of one policy area. And consequently, if there had been anything that Keir had said on Brexit, I think that would have just got exploded up in ways that would have been really unhelpful for us and really helpful for the government. And the second thing is both short game and long game, which is, and this is following on from what Christabel said, which is accountability. We know perfectly well that Johnson and Cummings do not want to be held accountable or responsible for any negative outcomes. We can see this all the way through. They're all about some created positive future. Johnson's language is always about optimism. Optimism is about the future, not about the present. And so we saw last week again with the decision about people going back to work. Johnson had clearly planned to say, we're doing this because the science says it's fine to do this. Then, obviously, Vallance gave evidence to the Select Committee and blew that bit of Johnson's speech completely out of the water. So he couldn't actually say that, the science allows us all, and so I say we should all go back to work. That's my nuanced way of saying what he would have said, because the science says we've all got to go back to work. And so then he went, well, it's now, it's down to employers. Employers should get their workers back to work. It is about, again, him not taking responsibility and not being in a position where he needs to be held account for a decision. That's what's resulted in our complete mess of a communication strategy as England over COVID-19. So by us not being part of that, kind of that decision-making process, which we have no control over with his 80-seat majority, by us not then making us part of that debate right now, it is making sure that accountability does rest with him. And I'm glad Mike said earlier that we're going to get on to where the talks are, because they are going badly. So that needs to be firmly at the door of this government, and the government needs to have nowhere to hide. So then the long game. What's the long game? And in short, it's competence. So by Keir making his attack lines on the government all about their competence about COVID-19, that serves, that kind of lawyer's pad laying out, that serves our purposes for the end of the year. Because once the voters think this government is incompetent, and they're getting there quite quickly, then we then have the Brexit mess and the costs at the end of the year, which are entirely the responsibility of this government, because nobody else has been involved in it in any way and can be diverted, nothing can be diverted off this government. Then we ship that competence image away just from Brexit and into just from COVID-19 and into the broader Brexit context, so that then this becomes in its entirety an incompetent project. We might also then be able to point to things that the EU have done really well. We'll see how the budget talks go and all of that. But this conversation in the main has always been about the UK and what's happening inside the UK. So we tie Brexit to their overall levels of incompetence. On the way, we have tactical battles. And those tactical battles are the ones that are happening, for example, tonight on the trade debate, And oh look, taking back control means we don't get any control over trade deals. I had more say over trade deals in the European Parliament than my MP colleagues do over anything the government's proposing at the moment. We'll see how that vote goes tonight. And things like food standards, again, popular with voters, but it's a real issue, not the vacuity of take back control or sunny uplands or all of this. We deal now as in Brexit and its concrete outcomes. And so let's deal with what's in front of us and what voters can actually touch or, very importantly, feel about this issue. And that's where I think is judged this well, and why I think we're laying it up really well for the future in terms of where we'll get to. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, both of you. That was great. Right, it's now, what time is it? 6:30 on the dot. Perfect. So if you would like to ask a question, can you put your hand up using the participants tab and the raise hand button. Alternatively, you can type your question in the chat. So I'm just going to go back and read the chat now and see what questions are in there. In the meantime, Michael Farmer, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes.
Or
Thanks very much. Can you hear me?
I can. If it's for a specific person, then please say so. Otherwise, just go ahead and ask.
Yeah. Nice to see Claire again from the southwest. I'm in Cheltenham, just about in the southwest. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things that Christabel and Claire said, and then ask my question. I agree with most of what was being said. It seemed to me that the issues are around detail rather than principle. And that seems to be the approach that's being adopted with COVID-19 as well. Christabel mentioned jobs and Claire mentioned food standards. I'd like just to broaden those to three issues which I think are really important to the public, which is jobs, safety and security. And it seems to me those three issues are ones that need to be tackled. And how are the negotiations and the future arrangements with the EU going to protect jobs, safety of citizens, that's food standards and all sorts of other things as well, like medicines and so on, and security. And it seems to me those three things are very important to everybody, whether they voted leave or remain. There's one other thing I'd just like to pick up on what Claire said, which is accountability and competence. I would put the word trust, or lack of it, and the importance of demonstrating that this government is not to be trusted. And it seems to me that is a line that's also being adopted with COVID-19 as well. My question relates to how Labour will work with other groups like farmers, businesses, and I am not at all clear where the trade unions sit at the moment, particularly with elections going on, but where the trade unions sit. And my other question relates to how we play the question of the threats to the union, that is the United Kingdom. Seems to me that's quite a tricky issue for Labour, given its almost disappearance in Scotland. So how do we play it with other groups who may be spotting the disadvantages of what's going on, and how do we play the question of the future of the union?
Great, thank you very much, Michael. Christabel, do you want to give your quick answer to those questions?
I don't know if Claire, were you waving, Claire?
Well, I was, yes. I've got.
No, go on.
I didn't see you waving. In that case, please go ahead.
Right. Well, actually, I wanted to pick up on the first thing you said, which was, Michael, which was about the three issues. And in particular, perhaps, I mean, security being the one I picked out and circled, simply because if you look at the global environment we're sitting in now, it feels a lot colder now than it did in 2016. You know, that started with Trump. If Trump had been voted into the presidency in the US before Brexit, if those two votes in 2016 had been the other way around, I think we'd have had a different result in Brexit. But you've now got, you know, America being really out there. You've got China now as a hostile power instead of the golden relationship as it was seen previously. So all of this is making it look a lot more dangerous being outside the EU than it was inside the EU. And I think that's breaking through to citizens right now. So I think that's a really important issue that we need to keep emphasizing. And actually, we haven't talked much about, but Lisa Nandy is saying these things as well as others. Trust, completely right. That is absolutely an issue, and nothing exemplifies that more than Cummings and Barnard Castle. But there are other areas in the way, you know, other ways in which it is demonstrated. So yeah, breaking that trust in him is both Johnson and Cummings is really important. And we are seeing as well the polling saying that that's coming through with citizens too. And the threats to the union, yes, definitely Scotland. I don't know what's going to happen next in the elections next year, next May, but the way things stand, it looks like the SNP will get a majority to the extent that they will be able to claim legitimacy for a referendum, possibly more so than they did in 2011 when Cameron granted a referendum. But in addition to that, we also have Northern Ireland, and the chaos around what's going to happen in Northern Ireland as a consequence of the revisions to the withdrawal agreement that Johnson did, and the lack of preparation for the implementation of that revision at the end of this year. So yeah, I am very concerned about losing Scotland, and actually I am concerned about what's going to happen in Northern Ireland, and therefore down the line the possibility also that, you know, we become England and Wales. I could say a lot more, but Christabel.
Christabel, do you want to add anything quickly to that, or if we can move on to another question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree pretty much with everything that Claire was saying there. I mean, there's just a bit, I think, in the question about working with other parties, and I think that's what I would want to be seeing Labour doing right now. So talking to businesses, going to those, you know, especially manufacturing businesses in those red wall seats, because they are more reliant on manufacturing than the rest of the country. I would, you know, some trade union leaders have not covered themselves in glory over this, unfortunately, but you know, they seem to be sort of representing themselves rather than actually wanting to represent the interests of their members. But you know, there are ones that do, and we should definitely be working. We should be definitely working with them as well. I mean, I think, you know, there are so many good reasons why a lot of EU regulations are actually quite good, and I think we've never made that argument. We've sort of allowed the kind of the lazy press caricature of, you know, bendy bananas and all that sort of stuff that Johnson, of course, you know, mightily contributed to when he was a journalist. We've never sort of actually, you know, worked with these groups and sort of said, well, no, this is the reason we have these regulations. These are the people that they benefit. So I hope that this is a really good opportunity to start doing that. And
Labour is working with the farmers. You know, Luke Pollard, one of our, you know, a Southwest MP who's leading on the DEFRA stuff, he absolutely is doing that. And I know there are, you know, the front bench is reaching out to a lot of groups.
Great, thank you so much. Right, next question from Keith Macdonald, please. Keith, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Right. Well, it's picking up on Scotland. I'm Scottish, right? And I think we could be heading for utter disaster, frankly. I think we may be assuming that Johnson will not agree to a request for a referendum if the SNP have a majority in the Scottish Parliament. I don't think that's right. I think he would agree to a referendum because he can increase his majority in the House of Commons by nearly 50 if he does that. And of course, it would also utterly demoralise and destroy the Labour Party. He's not a conservative, he's a kind of reactionary or revolutionary. And the idea of getting rid of Scotland would fit in exactly, in my opinion, with his ideology. Now, the way we deal with that, I think, is that Keir has to be more clear about articulating the international agenda. What is driving Scottish nationalism is English nationalism. It's that that's destroying the Union. Scottish nationalism can't do it. And Keir needs to articulate the internationalist agenda, not rejoining the EU, not falling in love with the EU, but the practical measures that we've already talked about. The cooperation on the environment, the cooperation on social policy. But we haven't articulated that enough. Most people don't realise we have a different agenda for the EU negotiations from the government's one.
Okay.
Okay? And so therefore, I think we need to articulate that. And I'm really concerned about it. I'm really concerned about that. That's my point.
No, that's great, Keith. I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to quiet you down. Somebody was speaking over you. Have you finished your question?
I think, well, it's a point rather than a question, and I think part of it's already been covered. But since I may be the only Scot present, can I please draw to your attention? We could be in a situation where Johnson's majority at the next election is 120 plus, not 81. If Scotland does not participate in the next election, and that's a real possibility.
Great, thank you. I mean, Claire or Christabel, have you got anything to add on Scotland or what you think Labour ought to be doing about Scotland?
Only to say that I share Keith's concerns. I don't know, I mean, at the moment, from what I can see from south of the border, very much south of the border, not having any Scottish politics experience, is that Sturgeon is currently setting herself up in opposition to Johnson, and consequently, that is what she's winning on right now. But yeah, we have to find a way of not allowing Johnson's anarchist tendencies to be in a position where we do have a referendum and then subsequently lose it because of Johnson as well.
The only thing I'd like to add to that, and again, I am exactly the sort of person who should not be commenting on Scottish politics or telling you what you think, because I am the quintessential Londoner. But it does strike me that, and I'd be interested in your opinion, that at least some of what is driving Scottish nationalism at the moment is the thought that there is no other way of stopping the Tories being in charge of Scotland, that the only way to do it is full independence. And you sort of look at the last election, the fact was the choice was between Johnson and Corbyn, and I can see why a lot of Scottish people just thought, well, let's just get shot of the lot of them. I don't know whether I'm being optimistic or not, but I would hope that the sight of a Labour leader doing better and the real prospect that we could have a Labour government, very possibly in coalition with the SNP, we don't know, in Westminster in 2024 would maybe lead some people to reconsider whether independence was what they really wanted or it was just a means to getting rid of the Tories.
Hello, Mike. It's Phil Watson speaking.
Hi, Phil. Can I come to you in a minute? there's two more people wanting to speak on.
Well, what time are you closing these Zoom calls?
What time? Just after 7 o'clock.
Well, could you let me say a couple of words before 7, please, Mike?
Yes, I will do.
I'm using my Galaxy smartphone, and I'm not very savvy with this modern technology, but I would like to say a couple of words.
That's fine, Philip. Don't worry. Well, I'll come to you. I've got Rick and David next, then I'll come to you after them.
Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome. No problem. Rick, Gail, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Thanks, Mike. And hello, Claire. I haven't seen you for a long time. I'm going to agree with everybody. I think things that everybody has said, but amplify them a little bit. I especially agreed with what Keith said just now, and I think Scotland is critical, because I'm increasingly coming to think that really people like Johnson and Cummings don't much care whether they are leading the United Kingdom or just kings of the dunghill. I think it is possible that they might be prepared to write Scotland off in the way that they have, if you look at it, already written off Northern Ireland. I'm not sure they care that much if Northern Ireland ceases to be part of the United Kingdom, and I don't know how much they care about Scotland. And I agree entirely with Claire about the incompetence thing, and I think we do need to keep on attacking the Tories on the basis of incompetence. But in addition to the incompetence, there are two other characteristics which seem to me to be important. One is lying, the constant lying about absolutely everything, which has become more or less compulsive now. And the third thing is the corruption. The way that government contracts are leased out, especially for issues to do with the COVID pandemic, that seem to have no rhyme or reason to them, except that the people winning the contracts are friends of various Tories. And I worry, and coming back to both what Claire and Christabel have said, about the idea that you can't actually attack the Tories on all fronts at the same time. So I worry that, you know, we can concentrate on COVID, and clearly COVID's uppermost in most voters' minds at the moment. But these other things are continuing, and they are also very important. So if we fail to mention Brexit and the fact that things are going to be very difficult in January, partly because of Brexit, and we fail to mention the effect that Brexit might have on the Scottish elections, then I think we're failing to appeal to, or at least to be clear to some of the people that we need to bring with us. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Rick. Claire, do you want to respond to that?
Very quickly, I just wanted to pick up on one of the points that Rick made, and it's lovely to see you as well, is the point about the corruption, actually, and these, whatever you want to call it. Personally, I think it is. Even if it's not, you know, financially corrupt, I think it is certainly a kind of chumocracy, as it's called. I think we desperately need some more coverage of that. And when I was talking earlier about dealing with issues, you know, tactics on issues, this is one of those issues. We need select committee to dig into this properly. I hope to God the Public Affairs Committee or the Public Accounts Committee are going to be digging into this, because they have ripped up the legislation around procurement to give these contracts to their mates. And I don't understand why journalists aren't shouting about that. I don't understand why there isn't more of a fuss around this, because they have, you know, we have had a fairly clean system, and part of that has been because there is process around procurement. So yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and I think there should a lot more of us should be shouting loudly about this. And it's not just that it's going to their mates; it's going to their Leave campaign mates. So you know, this is a very small slice, and you know, by the way, data is involved in that as well. So there are lots of things we need to be very concerned about on that whole procurement side.
If I could just again
Go ahead,
come in there, I think it's a potentially quite rich vein of attack on the Tories, simply because, again, if you look at those voters that switched to them in 2019, a lot of them Labour voters, again, you know, they are actually quite left-wing. They are people who are quite suspicious of big business. They are, you know, they voted, or they thought that they were voting against an elite, that a self-serving elite that you know is self-perpetuating its own privilege. So I think the more that we remind people, as we see Dominic Cummings coming out of his huge North London house to go and break the rules that absolutely everybody else has stuck by, that we just need to remind people of what the Tories really are and how they're the elite. It's their rich friends, it's their, you know, connections to some of these dodgy companies that we need to be highlighting. I do think that will resonate with a lot of the voters that they won over in 2019. So I think that is a very rich vein of attack for us on them.
Great, thank you, Christabel. Right, we've got a question from David Blackman next. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, hello, thank you. I think we shouldn't go banging on about Brexit, but I think it's a good tactic that all the time our speakers are saying, and then don't forget Brexit. But I'd like to pick up on the security issue. And I'm glad to see that Lisa Nandy is actually getting on to the question of having a clear Labour Party policy on attitudes to Russia and China. And the Russia report, the famous Russia report, is due to come out this week. And it may well be that we do need to get on to, there's an EU angle here, we wait to see, we're not quite sure. But certainly there must be dirt there, which is why the other, Dominic Cummings wanted it blocked, and they hate Dominic Grieve, and that's probably why it was blocked. But Dominic Grieve says, don't raise your hopes too high, but I think there is going to be material we can use, and with the one or two of us who've been old Russia hands who actually demanded this since late 2016, there was smell and noise about corruption and interference in the referendum. So let's exploit that, and that obviously any EU angle there, the referendum angle there, we should be exploited. And I hope our front bench is going to be ready and poised. There are enough good Ben Bradshaw and others who will run with this one. So this may have a good Brexit angle, but otherwise don't forget Brexit. It's right tactically normally to say, and then there's Brexit, but let's actually develop a Labour Party policy in security, Council of Europe, North Atlantic Assembly, and all those things, bodies which we're not leaving. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Christabel Clare, who wants to comment?
Hello, Mike. You haven't forgot me, have you?
No, I haven't. Don't worry. I'll come to you next.
All I'd say is I agree entirely. that was my only response.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that becomes transparent is that if you're going to deal with China, I mean, the Russia report's coming out tomorrow morning, and we will know then what is and isn't in it. I think Tory donors will be a big part of that. I think that'll be from what I understand, will be our best attack line. But there may be stuff around the referendum we can use, which would be helpful. But also, if we are going to be in a position to deal with China, if we're going to be in a position to deal with Russia, then we need to deal on that with allies. And if we are just turning our back on our allies, then that is causing us a problem. And Lisa is making that point. Lisa Nandy, our spokesperson, our Shadow Foreign Secretary, is making exactly that point. And long may she keep doing it. I want us to be in a Robin Cook territory, and I think Lisa's getting us there.
Great, thank you so much. Right, Philip, we'll come to you for brief comments and/or a question. Just a second, Philip, before you go. If anyone else wants to ask a question verbally, please raise your hand in the chat. Go ahead, Philip, sorry.
Right, thank you very much indeed, Mike, for allowing me to speak. What I wanted to say is this. We've got to realise that the Conservatives, their attacks on the European Union and the whole Brexit debacle is to attack working people, not just in Great Britain, but all across the European Union. It is an attack on working people's rights and abilities and human rights. They have abandoned Scotland. The Conservatives have abandoned Scotland, they have abandoned Wales, and they've abandoned Northern Ireland. And they are going to abandon the whole population of Great Britain with their Brexit nonsense. Now, more specifically, I would ask quite respectfully regarding the Galileo projects for the communications, the rights of European citizens in the UK and on the continent, and the student exchanges. I could go on and on and on about the European regional development funds,
yeah,
the vaccines, the health arrangements when you travel abroad. I do believe the Conservative agenda is to have a very right-wing, a very conservative agenda to subjugate working people to a life of purgatory. And dare I say, the Labour Party under the previous leadership have been very, in my opinion, very, very equivocal regarding Britain's relationship with the European Union. I am a pro-European, and I think that's the only way forward. Thank you very much indeed, Mike, for allowing me to speak.
No problem. Thank you, Philip. As I say, if anyone wants to ask the question verbally, put your hand up in the chat. If not, I will start looking through the written chat and see what questions I can find. Thanks for all the comments in here. So we've had one on Scotland that we've already answered, I think. So there's one on job losses. Jenny was saying that the government could also ascribe these to coronavirus. Why not focus things now on things that are just Brexit related, so food standards, environmental standards? Does anyone want to talk, I mean, Christabel or Claire, do you want to talk about whether job losses can be split into two camps, as in Brexit, just Brexit related and just coronavirus related, or whether you think that's maybe too complicated to communicate to people?
Go ahead.
Sorry, just leaving. It is going to be possible to, I think, distinguish the two. But I mean, as Christabel said, the economy is going to be in dire straits by the end of this year. So yeah, that will be a fact. It is then going to be different bits of the economy that are impacted by Brexit at the end of the year. And that's why I think you will be able to see the added on impact that this government will be responsible for. And exactly as Christabel said earlier, you know, we are not talking about deal or no deal in the Article 50 sense of cliff edge or a smooth transition, smooth move into transition. There are going to be checks at the border at the end of this year. Johnson has decided that, Cummings have decided that, we're leaving the single market, we're leaving the customs union, and consequently, our lorry drivers, our freight, all the rest of it is going to have to fill in forms, and they are going to have to be checked. And even if the UK government has said it will not check our borders, the EU side will. I mean, the idea, going back to the security question, that we don't check our borders in terms of what comes in is pretty gobsmacking. They will be checked when they go into the EU. So, you know, this is going to, a deal will still mean massive changes and massive costs to industry. And there will be, you know, consequent impacts on different sectors of the economy.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, so that's kind of why I think it would be good if we started actually isolating the places that will be hit. The I mean, actually services will be really hit, but I think in terms of the message that we want to give, I think it'd probably be more iconic if we talked about manufacturing. But yeah, I mean, obviously in the overall job numbers, we won't be able to see it. But I think in terms of the stories we tell, I think in terms of the sort of, if we specifically go to the bosses of those industries, we go to the trade unions in those particular workplaces which are exposed to Brexit, then I think we will be able to get that across, that this is not just a COVID related catastrophe, that this is specifically because the government did not bother to go into a transition period or bother to negotiate a proper trade deal.
Great, thank you. So question from Catherine Reynolds was talking about how you justify a close relationship without full membership when you've got over 50% of the population already saying they want to stay in the EU, and the fact that that number might go up. Again, question to both of you on this, but then also just an addendum from me. I fully, obviously I want Labour in 2024 to be talking about a closer relationship with the European Union, and to do that justifying it based on jobs and based on regulation, which I think is actually appealing to voters, and I think that's one thing that will actually hold the government back. in terms of being able to rip up regulations, the fact that people genuinely like it. But the difficulty for Labour, and of course what the Tories will do, is immediately say, you want us to be a vassal state. You want us to take regulation, but not have a say in staying it. So I think it's a difficult line for Labour. It will be a difficult line for Labour to walk, to say that we should join the customs union and single market, without then facing the question, of course, from the Conservatives, but also from interviewers, about why we think that the UK should take regulation rather than set regulation. And therefore, is the logical conclusion then not membership? But I agree that opens up a whole other can of worms. So how do you think that Labour should handle that when the questions come from Emily Maitlis or Rishi Sunak or whoever it is? Thanks. Thought we'd end on an easy one.
I can say something.
Go ahead.
So yes, no, I mean, I think, you know, it's a really difficult question, which is why I think that we need to be arguing for the EU regulations on the basis that they're good regulations, rather than that because they're EU regulations. So I think, you know, I think if we're sort of saying, look, everyone, these are sort of things that the UK would be doing anyway because they're good, because we don't want to have rubbish American food, because we don't want to treat our workers badly. And if we join the single market, nothing changes, except we also save a whole bunch of jobs and save a whole load of costs and save a whole load of, you know, form filling and bureaucracy and all the red tape that the government said that they would cut, but actually will have increased. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, of course, it makes more sense to be a member, but in the end, whilst I know opinion polls say that more people, or just more people, would want to remain, well, the fact is that where we really fell down was that we never got a majority of people who wanted to go through the hassle of having a second referendum. So there are a bunch of people who would have voted Remain in a second referendum, but they just couldn't face going through another divisive period, and, you know, another period of uncertainty. So I think there was just never, we can't use that, I think, as a legitimate way of saying, okay, now we can just say rejoin, because I don't think that there is that public willingness to do that. I think people are genuinely sick of Brexit. They don't want to hear about it anymore. They want it to be done. Now, we know that it won't be. We know that we're going to be dragging this on for ages, but I don't think that there is yet that willingness, that groundswell for us to go back in. And I do think it needs to be that step-by-step process that we say, okay, the single market is a good thing because it's good for our economy, and these are the sort of things that we as a civilized country would be doing anyway, and we get this economic benefit. And then hopefully within time it just becomes transparently obvious that the next thing to do would be to rejoin. Great,
thank you. Claire?
I think just to add to that is that we will by then be dealing with lived experience. So instead of dealing with, you know, somebody else's GDP, or dealing with, you know, the kind of project fear ideas, we can actually point to stuff and say, right, okay, this is what we now don't have access to. This is what we've lost. This is what we need back. And therefore, you know, by doing that, make it real in people's lives, because that reality was always what Johnson and Cummings wanted to distract from, to say some fictional world would be better. Well, good luck to you. You got 6 months to deliver your fictional world. I don't think anyone here and many people outside think that, you know,